It is your innovation consultant. We are having our innovation chat Mondays. Today it is with Tonia Turner, an amazing international educator coming from Chicago originally. We are talking about standardized testing. Thank you all for coming to the Resilient Innovations Innovation Chat Monday. We have the amazing international educator from Chicago, Tonia Turner.
Hello.
Uh, we're talking about standardized testing. Tanya, I feel like you have a lot of experience with just diversity and uh, teaching. I don't know. Well, of course, since you're international, like you've taught different cultures, as we both have. But like standardized testing, is it even useful anymore, or like is it culturally applicable? If that makes sense.
I think you think of standardized education or standardized testing, it's used to measure what a student may know, and they compare it to the norms of students that are in their grade levels. When you think about its relevancy in today, I can recall as a child, my mom would always tell me not to use words that weren't in the dictionary because that was the measure of standard education. As we've grown, I see the word ain't in the dictionary. I see the word there are several words that are not considered to be standard English in the dictionary. So when I began to formulate my sentences, according to my mom's standards, I may be able to use those particular words. So when you turn around and you think about a standardized education or standardized testing, there are several problems that I have with it, and I don't think it's relevant. The first problem is every it doesn't diversity and inclusion, and I don't like to use that buzzword, but in essence what I mean by diversity and inclusion, in my household we were forced to use standardized English. In other households they may not, but are they still communicating? And so
Right.
that they are still able to communicate, does that say your communication is better than the others? Because I don't communicate the way that you communicate, does that make you a better person? I think the test give children stigmas and making them feel as if they can't, because when you think about education, it's ultimately learning. It's ultimately taking
Right.
things and applying these things to your life. What's the point of education if you're not going to use these things as you move along? And so if we're testing to see how one measures up in life, then again, we're going back and saying that there are many different norms that are not considered when the testing is made. So, and we can go into the cultural biases. There are a number of things, but those are just a few to name that why I don't think they're
Right. I mean, the cultural bias though, like you can have a culture if you have a classroom that is representing, like my classroom right now in China, I'm representing at least four different continents, right, in just one classroom. So how do I propose an assessment, or how does a district or a company, right, because private school and everything like that, how does that even how can you represent each culture? Because they, like, if they are, all of my students speak more than one language, right? So then the word that I use that can be found in the dictionary, but it may be a synonym for something else that they use, like a math term. So I would say slope, but in the British curriculum they say gradient. I have never heard. I was like, gradient,
Mhm,
what is that? I
mhm,
have never heard of that word used in a math term, but that's me coming from America. And
mhm.
then also teaching in an Asian country, uh, the way that they do math is completely different. Like they would rather I'm like, okay, which is the easiest route to get to wherever I need to get to? Whereas they're like, no, you just throw it in there. And I'm like, I don't really like dealing with negative numbers. So I'm doing it this way, you
Mhm.
know? So, but using a standardized test, how does I can understand if I need to check for understanding within my classroom, because I can create what can be applicable for every student. So if I have 10 questions over fractions, I may have 2 to 3 different ways or 2 to 3 different question type styles of questions within that, so that, because I know, okay, Johnny is going to understand the fractions when I say something about pizza. However, I know he's not, when it comes to a word problem, he's going to struggle. But I also need to push Sally Mae over here, so she needs to get this word, you know what I mean? Different ways. But then when you have a standardized test, I feel like it isn't differentiated. It doesn't meet any cultural needs, or because students get caught up in names. You know what I mean? I can't pronounce this name. It doesn't matter. Just keep it pushing, you know? So I don't really, when you bring the cultural aspect into it, I don't think it's helpful anymore. I don't believe that it's, we can broad stroke education. I mean, I don't think we ever really could broad stroke education, but now, so more than ever, education you just can't take one brush and paint everything blue. It doesn't work like that, because you have the special needs students, but just because I read the test to them doesn't mean that their needs are being met, or I'm able to show that they can use this knowledge in a real world setting, right? Which brings me to like the next component. I see a lot of districts are going towards digital testing. I mean, especially with this pandemic now. I mean, I remember having online tests, and then they have like now my company, they were trying to look at like a proctoring thing, so that students can't go to different websites while they're supposed to take the test. But I told them, I said, me, myself, I have at least 3 devices, right? That's personal. Okay, I have my regular laptop, an iPad, and a cell phone. I said, you can't proctor all 3 of them. So I may take this test on this laptop, but I also I may have my notes on my iPad, or the textbook or something of that sort. So I don't know, but for me, I'm like, okay, I get the proctoring of the exam to make it as legitimate as possible. But if a child is being that resourceful, that technically is a skill set. You know? So then with testing and standardized testing, what skill sets should we be focusing on, in your opinion?
Well, the thing about it is, as I teach kindergarten currently, we do have a number of tests that are on the computers. They haven't figured
At
out.
kindergarten?
Yes, in WEA, we take that test online, and they haven't figured out how to manipulate a computer in a sense where they can go cheat, if you will. However, I will have, especially at the beginning of the school year, most of the struggle is them learning how to move a mouse, or learning how to pick up, they may say show 3 apples, them having to pick up those 3 apples and drop them into a box. So again, when we start seeing this test is to measure a student's growth, this test is to measure how they, because that's what the NWEA is really focused upon, growth, but they will also let you know if your student is college ready, if your student is on grade level, nearing, and things of that nature. And so when you think about those assessments, you begin to wonder exactly what are we assessing? Are we assessing their ability to be able to manipulate a computer screen? Are we assessing whether they know how to, the value of a number? So my thoughts is that you would think you want to measure their growth, because tying these tests to a teacher's, I think they put the assessments here to measure accountability for teachers.
Right.
For so long here in the States, we've had students going to school, and we didn't consider the progress of the child or. So now it's become a situation where a teacher is evaluated based on the student's growth, or based on the student's ability to have learned some things. So
Right.
Again, when you're teaching, those are things that you have to take into consideration. But the reality of it is, what I would hope that the assessment is to say, and I mean, this is your purpose of Common Core standards. If we got the Common Core standards, what's the purpose of the standardized testing? To see how far the student has done on the test. So It's a lot. And I just, I don't think that we have as a culture or as a country, especially in the United States, have really focused on what exactly are we measuring. Because again, like you said, in the midst of this pandemic, many I have become a technical, no offense to any IT people, but
Right.
a master of certain softwares in order to thrive and get my job done, and again, when you think about, just as a teacher, what is my job? Is it to teach kids how to log on, or is it to actually teach the lesson? So it goes back to us being strategic and planning on how to use it. I think when we had the little red schoolhouse here in the United States, it was just a matter of, all the kids, you don't know your ABCs, you could be 12, you could be 4, you could be 6, you were all in this one
Right.
classroom and you were learning a basic education. And I guess as we progressed to saying, hey, here's how we're going to standardize these tests. And I think in the future, hopefully near, that there's a possibility that we would review what's the purpose of this test, how it's used, and use it in a more helpful way.
Right. And I think you mentioned a lot, like what is our goals? What is our, because us being, oh Lord, sorry. Us being international teachers, right? I, Lord have mercy. Anyway, us being international teachers, we are able to see the U.S. on the international platform, right? Kind of outside of the the snow globe, right? That Americans are kind of we get stuck in. Like if you haven't traveled out and you haven't really been able to stay
Exactly.
somewhere outside of your country for maybe a week, not even a week, like two or more weeks, you don't really get that perspective. So having that being said, right now I've been doing trainings and courses over like global citizenship, right? Or having students become global ambassadors. And so like as a country, what skills are we wanting to teach our students? Is it just for our country, or is it so that the citizens in our country can excel not only here but elsewhere, right? And if that's the case, then that means they need to be culturally first of all, culturally knowledgeable, okay, and culturally sensitive. They need to be able to see people past whatever skin color, deformity, whatever they might, short, tall, fat, green, blue, or yellow. They need to see people at their worth and being able to, and then there's a certain level of confidence that goes into that. So what I'm finding now is that there's a lot more, there should be a lot more focus on soft skills than like, yes, kids can pick up the concept, they can watch a YouTube video. My little brother, who is now a 10th grader, Lord, I'll see him, he's struggling with something, he pulls up YouTube. YouTube is his teacher at this point. I don't see I need an article. I like to read something. Videos aren't super duper helpful for me, except when cooking. Okay, I have the Tasty app. Listen, that video helps me. Okay. But I mean, but that's the difference though. Our different learning styles based upon the concept. Math can be visual, whereas reading, it can be auditory. Or it could, I test my kids their learning styles based upon, but so I have a student that'll maybe his is musical, but it doesn't necessarily mean that he needs to make a math song every project. So I don't know, with standardized testing, but that's a good question. How do we incorporate multiple intelligences into standardized testing? Because with all that testing, I remember when I was teaching in the States, drilling those kids, like we're having assessments every week. Then you have a district assessment every 6 weeks or every 3 weeks or whatever the case. And they're like, oh, the kid didn't do well on this particular TEK or concept. then test him again. But I'm like, if he failed the first time and he knows he failed, me testing him 3 days later is not boosting his confidence to say, okay, I got it this time, you know? So how do you think standardized testing can be a little bit more confident, more of a confidence booster than how we beat kids down nowadays with the constant assessments?
As I indicated too, we do have the assessment, it's the NWEA assessment here in the States. And I mean, I'm referencing the States because it's my most current experience. So, but and to your point, it definitely did give us a view and seeing things around the world and seeing how others learn and things of that nature. When it comes to that, the NWEA measures growth. And like I said, they measure your ability to be on grade level. Don't think it's the of all be all, but it is a good test in the sense of you start in the fall, you take an assessment. Let's say your grade level is, you say 185 or 210 for math in fourth grade or grade 4.
Right.
You come in at the beginning of the year, let's say you score 199. What's happening here, the district is saying, we'll give you the year to move them up to 210. However, we'll measure their growth and take into accountability how they grew. So the goal is to, I think it's 10 points for intermediate, maybe 20 points for, that's considered to be a year's growth. And so those are things that will help build the student's confidence. Okay, I didn't meet the score, but I did grow. There are growth targets that you may have. So if the kid does come to you 2 or 3 grade levels behind, the goal is to ultimately get them on grade level. However, the growth will be measured towards the students. So that kind of builds their confidence. But if we focus too much on growth and not grade level, then we have students growing, but they're still not on quote unquote grade level. So we have issues with that. Again, for me, I'm just not a big fan of the standardized testing. Just the bottom line, because I mean, they take that one 3 times, and then like you said, there are district tests that they take. And what's happening is I'm doing more testing than I am teaching. Any great teacher knows that you can check,
Right.
you can check for understanding within your lesson, and you can check, you can be strategic about who you check and how you check if you want to actually get an understanding of what a student knows. And then, I mean, we don't get opportunities to reteach, after we test something, like you said, 3 days is not
Right.
to reteach a particular standard. If I've been teaching it this 6 weeks, and you tell me I got 3 days to retest, and what, like you said, what's going to change in 3 days versus 6 weeks? So the way that we use the test are,
Right.
So I'm not a fan, just not.
No, I mean a lot of people aren't. I mean, I think it's great to show growth. That's something that is extremely needed, just like you said, for confidence purposes. And I don't know, just for you have for the confidence purposes, but also and it kind of goes back to, like, if we look at an entire country, like governing an entire educational country, if you have a classroom of 18 million, or, how do you check for understanding of these particular topics? But I also believe that where I think we do need, as a country or as a globe, to reevaluate what type of skills are we trying to foster. Because the way that they're doing math now, I'm like, it's, I mean, and I'm teaching the higher grades, right, middle school, high school, but I'm like, okay, there are certain concepts that when you say, okay, how can I apply this in the real world? And they bring up the stock market. I'm like, baby, where? I barely know how to work the stock market. So the only real world application that a textbook can bring, or when I research it up, is a concept that is foreign to me. Then we may need to reevaluate and say, well, what type of resources are we, not resources, but what type of skill sets are we asking for? Do we want kids to be able to financial literacy? Do we need, which also takes it back to being culturally applicable? Because when I was teaching math in the States, I didn't know that because of the economic group that I was teaching, that they only handle cash. So I'm talking about a checkbook, you know what I mean, debit and credit, and they coming back to me, Miss Baker, my parents don't know how to do this. You know what I mean? So then is it the testing for, if we do, I don't think, what I'm trying to say is I don't think standardized testing can be standard. It can be maybe standard in a small geographical setting, but not standard overall, because there are certain aspects to just a child's life that they may not have access to. So if you're asking, and it may not even be applicable to them. So if I'm teaching a student who they only handle cash, their parents only handle cash, but now you want me to teach them parts of the stock market, that's not something that they can even comprehend or bring their mind to, because one, is not something that they're exposed to, but it's also not something that their family is familiarized with. It's not something they see in their daily life. So are we trying to teach our students to be, I don't know what, to be something, or to be able to function in their class system, or is it to be able to function in their class system and also move up if they want to? Because there's a different, that's a different ladder, right? Sometimes they always said that it was education, that was the ladder. It's the only ladder you had, was sports and education to move up. But now we know that there's different ladders. So I'm like, are we trying to teach them how to use those ladders? Are we trying to teach them on how to only be functional in a middle class state, economic status? Or because the kids that I have taught that are in the wealthy economic status, what they're learning is completely different from what I've taught when I was in like inner city schools. So I don't know, on all of that, what are your thoughts on that? That was a lot.
I'm just going to assume good intent, number one. Right. And I'm just going to assume, like, one, I'm a firm believer that education is exposure and experience. You learn from what you're exposed to, and you learn from the things that you do. That being said, all of those can help you learn to make good decisions. We also know that education here in the United States determines your quality of life. We don't have a class system that says if you're born into this family, well, sort of we do. It's unwritten, but I'm not going to even get into that.
Right. But, I mean, and not class system as in class system, but like economic property class, economic status class is what I meant.
Yeah. So the thing about it is that I'm just going to assume good intent. One thing I've told a number of people that I've had an opportunity to speak with, democracy here in the United States has weaved us into a web, and it's becoming sticky and icky getting out of that web. Again, we started out with a small population. Now we have millions of people, and we want to try to consider everyone, and we want to consider everyone's background, everyone's culture. When we're making decisions for the greater good, we are lumping everyone in, and it begins to become a system of, I can only believe X, Y, and Z about your race, or I can only believe A, B, and C about yours. And then when you standardize an education from a middle class perspective, again, I'm going to assume good intent is that, hey, if you're in a poverty-stricken environment, we want to help you move up by exposing you that you wouldn't necessarily have been exposed to, or you wouldn't necessarily know about. So, we do a career day. We have careers besides a basketball player. We may bring in an actuary. We may bring in botanists. We may bring in a number of different people so that we can expose our students to these different things. But it's also like, when, again, back to the testing piece of it, at what point do you allow educators to be educators? At what point do you allow teachers to be teachers in a classroom setting and can say, hey, this student has, because again, I'm just assuming good intent for the assessment, but it just went bad. This is a measure we'll use for promotion. This is a measure that will say that, this kid has mastered all of these standards and this kid is ready for the next grade level. However, it becomes punitive when you have a student who may come to school just with very limited information. I mean, it's assumed
I'm sorry.
Okay. It's off of these assessments that even before they start assessing, they assume when a student comes to school, they have a certain level of understanding about life. You know, it's assumed that a child may know their name. It's assumed that a child may know their colors. It's assumed that a child may know their alphabet and things of that nature. And so with that assumption, we begin the lessons right there. So again, when we're thinking about standard, you can, you know, make the assumption that the standards are coming from the middle class. But then again, you know, according to a few presidents, the middle class has been
Mhm.
removed. So it's the haves and the have nots. So where are we really getting our standards from?
Right, right. I think, I mean, when you were talking, I was thinking that what if instead of standardizing tests, and I mean, I guess you can standardize curriculum, I'm sure, that there are standard activities that must happen, right? So if our intent is for exposure, there needs to be, every school needs to have a career day, no matter what, what grade that school is. That could be a F school, a B school, A school. You must have these particular activities. Maybe it's 5 different school-wide activities that have to happen during the year, right? So at least to say that all of our kids in this country are getting exposure to different careers, or they're getting exposure to college, right? So like, there are schools that already offer this, so it wouldn't be a big thing. But there are schools that don't. There are schools where the kids are always in school. They're fighting just to get a field trip. You know what I mean? If you start mandating that there needs to be at least, 5 field trips per grade every year, right? Then that's something. But I mean, once you start going into that realm, then there's funding, right? Because to pay for the bus, and the bus to get there, and you can't go on Saturdays, and all of these things. Uh, I don't know. It's if you have a class of 18 million, I understand the need for standardized testing, or for standardized accountability, because I think that's more of what it is now. It's just holding everybody accountable. I don't really know if it's the student or the parents, or anything else, but I think it's just standardized testing is more towards accountability. And if we're able to let teachers educate, or let educators educate, then I think students whatever they're exposed to, they should be able to be successful in, right? If I'm able to just teach the child, for the whole child, and what they need, I should be able to, they should be able to be successful. I
Well,
mean,
I'm sorry to interrupt.
go ahead, go ahead.
Thinking about teaching the children everything that they need with the varying levels of needs. You know, I mean, you could see that in a classroom of 19, you could see that in a classroom of 32. The varying needs range from social emotional to academic. You know, there's a lack. But then, you know, again, when you start trying to measure a teacher up and saying, if this teacher is a good teacher, then a certain percentage of her students will be on grade level, a certain percentage of her students would have made some growth. And you start again with those teachers who don't make it, in that are in these disadvantaged neighborhoods, that are in these communities who don't, I mean, I believe at some point they use the Common Core to make it be one thing. Everybody in the United States at this particular grade level should be learning X, Y, and Z. Again, as always, unfortunately, I mean, my personal belief is that capitalism is destroying education. And I say that because just all of the politics that come into play behind the Common Core standards. As I looked at the standards, I got it, especially for the reading portion. I get it. I see how it's progressive. I mean, they came together as a group and they said, listen, by the time a kid gets to 12th grade, they need to know all of these things in order to be ready for college. They scaled it all the way back to kindergarten. I don't think they took into consideration to develop the emotional development of those 5-year-old students. And depending upon how that kindergarten year goes, it determines the way the rest of your school years are. And most of the focus, especially in the States, are on kids in grade 3, grade 6, grade 8, and grade 12. If we're waiting to determine in those particular grades if students have mastered these things, I mean, we're doing a disservice. We're doing a disservice. I mean, again, an effective educator is checking for understanding as they speak. Good morning, class. I'm waiting for a response. You've learned how to,
Right.
something as simple as that. I'm looking at you write your name on a piece of paper. I can determine your level of understanding the English language based off the way you wrote your name. And so, it's a number of things that go into play. But again, I don't need a test to tell me that this kid that are writing their letters backwards are really not understanding the function of the letters and don't know that the letters make a sound and then they make words. So I don't need a standardized test to tell me that. And then, you know, um, kids
Right.
learn a lot from watching and seeing. How can you measure that? I was
Right.
speaking with a parent over the COVID, and she was just expressing her frustration in a not so standard form of English. And her 5-year-old child told her, "Hey, mom, don't speak to my teacher like that." And she was very adamant about that. And she used the terminology, period, after she said it. But this is the same kid who only knows 8 alphabet sounds. So when we go to measure her and say, as far as her learning is concerned, the standard by the time she's at this part is she should be putting words together. And so she's well below the norm. But for her to be able to understand that, hey, this person holds a certain authority and you should speak in a certain way to this particular teacher, that said more to me than a standardized test will ever tell me.
Right. 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 And though again, and it goes back to what are the skills that we want our kids to have? Do
Yeah.
we want? I mean, I would rather my kid have 2 to 3 years of financial literacy, right? 2 to 3 years of well, maybe not real estate, but things, or of maybe 1 or 2 years of an entrepreneurship course, or think like applicable things, and then to just say, oh, you need to uh, you need to be able to find the circumference of a circle.
But
How about we have, it's, I don't know, the concepts, the focuses, they're great. And like you said, it makes sense. But then when you start looking at the statistics of kids who are actually college ready, the statistics of kids who are actually that will get hired in those STEM fields and those high paying job um, titles, the companies and the colleges still say that the kids aren't ready. So I'm like, okay, we're doing all these testing and we're doing the curriculum focus is changing and all those things. But if the kids still aren't ready, is it because of their knowledge and their willingness to learn, or do they not know how to take notes? Do they not know how to adapt in different environments? Do they not know how to function independently? Do they not know how to, if I don't tell you to collaborate, do you know that you can go collaborate? You know what I mean? Like, do you know how to function without me telling you that you need to go make a study group? You know what I mean? Like, I think that skill set is almost, if not more important than knowing the concept. You can learn anything that you want in life. You should be a lifelong learner. But if you don't know how to learn on your own, then I think that's the bigger problem.
Yeah, that's definitely a problem. Just reflecting it back to the things that you feel that would be really, you would want your child to indulge in as far as education is concerned. You're speaking from a point of privilege because you also have to take into consideration thinking about when we were over in the United Arab Emirates, we had parents who did not speak English and they were reliant upon us as the professionals to teach their children. I take that and equate it to a lot of the parents who may not be may not have passed the standardized testing as they were coming along in school.
Right.
You know, they may not be able to conjugate the correct verbs and have the language and saying, you know, I mean, the fact that they bring their kids to school, I'm under the impression, and like I said, I'm going to assume good intent for everyone, is that they want their child to learn. But I was being reflective and thinking about, why didn't I teach my children the Google Classroom? You know, I was beating myself up. And I really had to be honest with myself, you know, because it would be helpful right now, but I had to be honest with myself. What's most important? These kids who don't know their alphabet sounds, or teaching them how to get onto the Google Classroom. So when
Right.
you get into that frame of reference, you, yeah, as a parent of a privilege, you know, as of exposure, as a parent who knows what's going to be in the best interest for her child, you can come and advocate in that capacity. And I'm sure
Right.
if the parents would have known that this would happen, they would have been, Miss Turner, I don't care about the alphabet. I prefer for my students to learn how to do the Google Classroom, so that way life won't be a task for us every morning, a fight or whatever, trying to get this child logged on for e-learning. You know, I mean, but I mean, as a
No,
professor.
but it's super true. It's super true. And it begs the question of, just with standardized testing, on how it can't be standard, right? There isn't a standard, because everyone who speaks is speaking from their place of privilege, or their place of underrepresentation. Whichever place you're speaking from, you're speaking from that place. And not saying that none of it is valid, it is. But if I'm in this economic class, and I know, and my child is coming into the economic class, then I know there are social norms that they need to know how to function through. Whereas, or like you said, teaching overseas, the parents care more about English, learning English, because they know that their child needs to know English for them to do anything else outside of whatever country they happen to be in. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? Whether that is the UAE, whether that's in India, whether that's in China, they know for their child to get a passport and function outside of whatever country they're in, they do need to have some sort, they need to know a second language. Whereas in the States, we don't do that. We don't say
Yeah,
that.
what's your master in the King's English?
Right. Right. I mean, and then how many days go by that I said, man, I really should have paid more attention. I should have advocated for myself to be in a different. I took Spanish one. I had a very strict Spanish teacher, and I learned Spanish. I was using it outside randomly. But the second year I had Spanish, I had a more lax teacher. He really didn't care. I thought I was living large. Then I move overseas, and I'm like, Lord, if I could just touch another language.
Excellent question. I know when I first moved there, I flew right back to Spanish. Like it was, you know, this is a foreign, like just unconsciously, as I'm speaking and I'm starting to speak in Spanish, I'm like, no, 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 this is Arabic. That was like my own
Right.
language and my go-to. And like
Right.
it was just, and like even being over there, my intentions were to figure out Arabic and things of that nature, just so that I can have that. And I mean, again, when you're thinking about standards, we would like to have our kids to be able to speak several languages, but if we can't do English, how can we do add
But
up?
again, like you said, that's a privilege. That is a privileged standpoint, because if we're the kids that I've taught, what they need to know Arabic for? You know what I mean? What do they need to know Mandarin for? Whereas I'm sitting here and I'm like, Lord, this different alphabet, I'm struggling. I'm like,
Wait, what are we doing?
I am struggling as much as I wanted to learn the different things, and just to, when you want to learn it, you know what I mean? And then from the time that you want to learn it to when you actually had the chance to learn it, it's just crazy. And then to the feeling that you get when I'm hanging out with my international friends, and they all know more than one language. My husband knows three, and I'm sitting here struggling with one. Okay. Okay, I don't want to hold you long. What are your ending thoughts on standardized testing?
Um, my hopes, my dreams, and my wishes is that we remove it, um, and start thinking of a more strategic way to measure students' learning, start thinking of more strategic ways to teach. And when I'm thinking of teaching, I mean, we have a lot of people that are calling for educational reform here in the United States. And, I wonder what resolve will we have with that. I mean, again, we're thinking about the point and the reason that we educate, and that is to make students lifelong learners and take those skills that they learn to help them live a prosperous life. How do you measure prosperous? For some, it may be I made it through through eighth grade. I made it through 12th
Right,
grade. For others, it's, hey, I'm running a corporation and things of that nature. So when you're thinking about the standardized testing, I hope that it's removed. And then I hope that we can look at education in a way that is more beneficial, not only to our students slash constituents, but also for the educator, also for everyone involved. And ultimately, it becomes great for our country.
right.
I'm gonna mute.
No, that was no, I completely agree. Thank you all for who have been watching with Tonia Turner, the international educator. I'm focuses strength is on literacy, is what I'm hearing, right?
Mhm.
Be sure to register for our STEM conference. The link is in the caption. And hey, we're out. Thank you again.
Thank you.